The left often presents itself as morally consistent, opposed to bigotry, supportive of trauma, defensive of indigenous identity. But when you look closely at how these principles are applied, a pattern emerges. The rules don't disappear, they change, and they tend to change most sharply when Jews are involved. This isn't about denying anyone else's suffering. It's about asking why the same standards are not applied evenly. Part 1. Fear, trauma, and who is allowed to have it. On the contemporary left, women and LGBT people are told that fear of heterosexual men is understandable, even when that fear is generalized. The reasoning is familiar. Men commit the majority of violent and sexual crimes. Many women have lived experience of abuse. Therefore, men are told they must accept being feared, even if they personally have done nothing wrong. This fear is not labeled bigotry. It's framed as trauma-informed self-protection. Men are told they can't fully understand this fear and shouldn't challenge it. But when fear is directed toward Islam or Muslims, the logic abruptly changes. Now fear becomes Islamophobia. Now it's described as irrational, immoral, or dangerous, even when it's rooted in lived experience, ideology-driven violence, or repeated attacks. So the question isn't whether generalized fear is acceptable. It clearly is, sometimes. The real question is, who is allowed to have it? Part 2. Identity and name reclamation. The left strongly supports indigenous name reclamation. Native Americans reclaim tribal names. Indigenous Australians use both European and Aboriginal names. Place names are restored. This is celebrated as decolonization, a rejection of forced assimilation, a restoration of dignity. But when Jews reclaim Hebrew or Middle Eastern names, often replacing names imposed during exile or survival in Europe, the response is very different. Instead of support, there's mockery, accusations of cosplaying, claims that Jews are really European and therefore inauthentic. The same act, reclaiming a pre-exilic identity, is praised in one group and ridiculed in another. Not because the history is different, but because the conclusion is inconvenient. Part 3. Indigeneity versus demographics. In Australia, the left insists, always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. This is said despite Aboriginal Australians being a small minority of the population. The same is true in the United States. Native Americans are not the majority, yet their indigenous status is unquestioned. Here, demographics do not matter. Indigeneity is about original presence, not numbers. Colonization does not erase legitimacy. But when Israel is discussed, the logic flips. Suddenly we hear, Arabs outnumber Jews. Jews were a minority. Therefore, Palestinians have the greater claim. This argument is never applied to Aboriginal Australians or Native Americans. If numerical majority determined legitimacy, those claims would collapse too. Yet only Jewish indigeneity is conditional. This inconsistency isn't accidental. It happens because Jewish history breaks the left's preferred framework. Jews are indigenous, but not powerless. Non-European, yet not neatly global South. Colonized, but also sovereign. So instead of adjusting the framework, exceptions are created. Fear is valid, except here. Reclamation is noble, except here. Indigeneity matters, except when it leads to Jewish sovereignty. What's presented as moral principle becomes outcome-based reasoning. A consistent position would say, trauma-based fear is human, even when imperfect. Reclaiming erased identities is legitimate for all peoples. Indigeneity does not disappear because demographics change. and Jewish history does not become invalid because Israel exists. If principles only apply when they're politically convenient, they're not principles at all. They're tools. And when empathy is rationed, people notice. That's why so many feel alienated, not from justice, but from a movement that no longer applies its own rules evenly. Before I go, I want to be clear about something. I am the old left guard. I speak from a tradition rooted in civil liberties, secularism, and universal human dignity. I'm here to challenge the modern left when it abandons those principles. Not from the outside, but from within. I am not Jewish, I am not Israeli, but I will defend Jewish self-determination and historical continuity when they are denied. Not because of identity, but because the same moral standards must apply to everyone. This channel exists to question selective empathy, ideological shortcuts, and the quiet erosion of consistency, especially when it becomes uncomfortable to speak. If these ideas resonate, then this conversation doesn't end here. In the next episode, we'll ask a harder question. What would have happened if the Palestinians had fully carried out the Al-Aqsa flood? That is a story for another time, as my time here is short.